Hello everyone, my name is David Clabo and today I'm talking about some work I did while working on my master's, and it's entitled Shortleaf Pine Survival Following Various Disturbances. So first I'll give a brief introduction on shortleaf pine. Shortleaf pine has the ability to sprout while trees are smaller than 6 to 8 inches in diameter at breast height, and the ability for shortleaf pine to sprout decreases with age and size, much like other species that can sprout. And sprouting is a response to stem injury or death from a disturbance such as herbivory or fire. Sprouts with shortleaf pine originate just above a physiological adaptation known as the basal crook. And the purpose of the basal crook, it's a root section that lowers dormant buds where sprouts originate from into the soil and duff layer and protects these dormant buds from lethal burn temperatures. Because of this adaptation, shortleaf pine is able to colonize areas with frequent low-intensity disturbances where other species that do not have the ability to sprout and do not have characteristics such as thick bark may not be able to compete. The timing of burning and seedling/sapling age are important factors that affect survival and height growth of shortleaf pine seedlings. Burns that are done in the summer are typically more intense and hotter than burns that are done, say, late in the growing season or in the early growing season. Knowledge of survival and annual height growth rates more than 1 year following disturbances in shortleaf pine is limited. Most studies just follow the seedlings or saplings 1 year after the conclusion of treatments and don't really follow them past that. So with that, the objectives of this study were: 1, to compare seedling survival 2 years after the final burning and clipping treatments that were applied at different seedling ages and periods of the growing season. And the second objective, which was not be covered necessarily in this comparison of statistical methods, was to assess annual height growth over a period of 2 years by treatment and seedling age after the final clipping and burning treatments applied at different seedling ages and periods of the growing season. And as I said before, the focus in this presentation will be on choosing the statistical method used to analyze the survival data. So the methods for this study was done and is continuing to go on at the UT Cumberland Forest in Morgan County, Tennessee. And this area is on the Walden's Ridge subregion of the Cumberland Plateau and is characterized by undulating ridges and valleys. And it's not like your typical plateau surface that is relatively flat with pretty thin soils. The site index for shortleaf pine here is 70 feet at base age 50 years. So these are good sites, but this area is still considered the Cumberland Plateau. And the actual site itself is a previously mown field, so there was a lack of woody stems on the site prior to the planting of the shortleaf pine seedlings. And 2,250 1.0 stock shortleaf pine seedlings were planted on February 25th, 2011 on the site. And these seedlings were obtained from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture Division of Forestry's nursery in Delano, Tennessee, and the seed source was from Arkansas for these seedlings. So 50 seedlings per experimental unit were planted on a 1 by 1 foot spacing, and there were 15 experimental units per block and 3 blocks. And so that means there were 3 reps of each unique treatment and seedling age combination. So here's a schematic of the study. Let me zoom in some so you can see it a little better. So the field where the seedlings were actually laid out in experimental units was 84 by 69 feet, and each experimental unit was 9 feet by 4 feet with 6-foot buffers on either side. And the 3 colors here represent each of the blocks, and each experimental unit in the block was assigned a random treatment. And you can see those are labeled there. So say BJ3 stands for July burn for 3-year-old seedlings. Let me zoom back out. Oops. So the methods continued. So the treatments we did were a March clip, a March burn, a July burn, a November burn, and an untreated control. The treatments were applied to 1, 2, and 3-year-old seedlings, and each experimental unit received a treatment once over the course of the study. Initial survival was recorded in 2014, less than 2 months after final treatments, which was the November burn on 3-year-old seedlings. Survival was classified as seedlings having less than 70% crown scores for seedlings that were burned, and anything greater than that in seedlings typically will not survive. Seedlings that were not top killed by a burn treatment were classified as survivors. But these 2014 survival assessments may not have been accurate. As I mentioned before, the November burns of 3-year-old seedlings did not have enough time to resprout, most likely, by the time the trees were assessed. And then sprouts may not have appeared yet by that time. And then survival was again assessed during January 2016, 2 full growing seasons following the conclusion of the study. So the study was set up as a randomized complete block design with replication, and blocking was done for shade and moisture differences across the study site. Survival is a binary response, either 1, a seedling is living, or 2, a seedling is dead. So analysis of variance, or ANOVA, assumes independence of errors and normal distribution of residuals and equal variance. The binomial distribution does not meet the normal distribution of residuals assumptions, and this made using a different survival analysis method than ANOVA necessary to get accurate results. So I had 2 possible analysis methods that I could use for this study. Logistic regression, which is known as GLM in R, and logistic regression uses the binomial distribution. And the assumptions of the binomial distribution are: 1, each replication in the process results in one of 2 possible outcomes, either success or failure. 2, the probability of success is the same in each replication. And 3, the replications are independent, meaning that one tree in a treatment does not influence the probability of success or survival in another tree. The data in this analysis fits those assumptions, and logistic regression does not take into account random effects in the data, which in my case was block here. My second option for this was the generalized linear mixed effects models, also known as GLMM in R. And this is a form of regression with fixed effects, which are parameters. And GLMM includes a random effect that applies to a sample. And this method allows non-normally distributed residuals and a link function of the mean, and can handle the binomial distribution. The response variable does not have to be normally distributed to do a GLMM. The random effects in a GLMM are considered a cluster. And for both of these analyses, I wanted to use an alpha level of 0.05. So I'm going to cover the random component of a GLMM a little bit more. A cluster is defined as a set of observations for a particular subject, and the model contains a random effect term for each subject. Block is considered a random observation in this case, and we're not really interested in a result for it. Block is the random effect of the ANOVA analysis. So initially I included block in a logistic regression model and found significant differences between blocks, but we created the blocks to account for site differences, so we would expect differences to be there if it's included in a regression model. The GLMM method represents the influence of random effects such as blocking on the seedlings that is not captured by the treatment or year fixed effects parameters, so the random effect is sort of built into a GLMM. So I'm going to go over the R packages that are necessary to run these analyses. For logistic regression, the ARM and leaves packages are necessary. And then for generalized linear mixed effects models, LME4 and NLME are necessary packages. And then to be able to assess the coefficient estimates from the regression, you have to use the inverse logit function, and it's simply INVLOGIT when you enter it in, and it's in the ARM package in R. And the inverse logit function is simply the exponent of x divided by 1 plus the exponent of x. So that I'm going to go over the R code for the logistic regression. First, I imported the data by copying and pasting it from a CSV Excel file. And in this Excel file, a seedling was given a 1 if it was a survivor or 0 if it was found dead at the time of assessment. So then I named this data set DAT2, and I simply copied it into R and then included the header equals true statement there in the code. Next, year and block were converted from integer to factor variables. For some reason, R wanted to count both of these variables as integer variables, but I wanted to include them as factor variables in the analysis. So I simply used the is.factor function to convert those. Then after this, the control treatment was set as the base level for all other treatments, factors, and interactions to be compared to. For some reason, R thought that the July burn should be my base level for the regression analysis, so I had to change that to the control, since that was the treatment that did not receive any type of burn or clip or anything like that. So to do that, I used the relevel function, and I set the reference equals CO, and CO is the code for control in this data set. And finally, I was able to run the logistic regression model. I named the output junk2. Block was not included. Recent survival was the response variable. Treatment and year are fixed effects, and treatment : year is the treatment times year interaction term. The binomial distribution was specified by family equals binomial, but this should be the default in logistic regression. And the link function was the logit link, and it is also the default for logistic regression. But I did a little more research on what a link function does, and the link specifies a function that relates the mean to the linear predictor and connects random and systematic components of the model. The logit link models the log of an odds, and this link function is appropriate when the mean is between 0 and 1. And then summary junk2 simply presents the result, or prints the results for the model. And then after this, I used the inverse logit function to convert regression coefficient estimates to percentages. So say for the control, I used invlogit, then the 1.16255, and this converted to 76.2% survival. And then for each treatment, I did the control minus that particular treatment. So for the July burn, you can see there I got 49.4%. So here's the R code for the generalized linear mixed effects models. The same steps were followed for this method as the logistic regression model. The data import, the variable conversion, and the control treatment was set as the base level. And here's the form of the generalized linear mixed effects model. I named this data set junk in honor of Dr. Zobel. He inspired me to do that. And then I had the same response and fixed parameters as the logistic regression model. And then the main difference here with this model is the random term here is 1. I guess that's an absolute value sign, and then block. And then after that, you have to designate the data set. So I had data equals dat2. Then you must set the distribution to family equals binomial, and a list of control parameters for model building must be set too. And the control for GLMMs that is best from what I've read is control equals glimmer control. And the next thing you must designate is the optimizer command, which prevents non-convergence warnings in the model. And for this I used the optimizer equals BobbyQual, and I did a little more research to find out exactly what this is. The purpose of BobbyQual is to minimize a function of many variables by using a trust region method that forms quadratic models by interpolation. So it's kind of some type of interpolation method for this type of statistics. And the two optimization options for a GLMM are BobbyQual and the Nelder-Mead methods, and I tested both and they didn't produce different results. So again, I used the summary function to print the results, and then I used the inverse logit again to convert the intercepts from the logit scale. So for the control I got 77.1% survival, and then I did the control minus each treatment to get those survival rates. So for this example, 32.9% for the July burn. So the results for the logistic regression, I had an AIC value of 2,966. The July burn, the March burn, the November burn, and the March clip times year interaction were all significantly different from the control. And for survival rates for the control, I had 76.2%, and that was the highest rate. The lowest rate was the March burn at 47.7%. Followed by the July burn at 49.4%, the November burn at 56.3%, and the March clip at 67.3%. And then I didn't really include survival rates for the year or any of the interaction terms. And here's the results for the GLMM model. It had an AIC value of 2,878. And the same variables were significantly different from the control, and those again were the July burn, the March burn, the November burn, and the March clip year interaction. So the control survival rate was 77.1%, and that was the highest. The lowest was the July burn at 32.9%. The March burn was the next lowest at 47.7%, followed by the November burn at 56.6%. and the March clip at 67.9%. So conclusions, the GLMM model had a lower AIC value than the GLM model. Lower is better for AIC models and suggests the model fits the data better. And both models had the same significantly different treatments, and these were the July burn, the March burn, the November burn, and the March clip times year interaction, and this was as it relates to the control. The inverse logit percentages were the same in both models for the March burn to very different for both models. The July burn in the GLM model was 49.4% survival rate, whereas in the GLMM it was 32.9%. The GLM model takes into account the random measurement variable block, and I didn't include that result because it's really a moot point since we're trying to account for the random variable. But overall, I trust the results provided by the GLMM model the most, and I was sticking to it for my analysis. But with that, here's my literature cited, and if anyone has any questions, here's my email, and thank you.